So 1 Corinthians 7, 8 through 9 says, "To the unmarried and the widows I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." 1 Corinthians 7, 32 through 35 says, "I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord, but the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit, but the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord." How would you answer the Apostle Paul there? Yeah, you can just use your mic.
Okay. I get this question a lot. The text in 1 Corinthians 7 is not the only thing the Bible has to say. So it is an instruction that was given to Corinthians at a particular time with an unusual circumstance. And it's verse 26. Let me go back to verse 25, 1 Corinthians 7:25. "Now concerning the betrothed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is." And then he goes on to give instructions there. What is this present distress? I don't know. But whatever it is looming large in Paul's mind in the instructions that he gives. And so it could be a famine, it could be some other kind of very, very difficult hardship, perhaps persecution in the church. But Paul is thinking that basically it's a way of saying, under the circumstances, I want to give you some counsel because there is a very distressing thing happening that you need to factor in. So let's say that we're in a time when war is about to break out, let's say World War II. And there's people being sent off to war, but a young man and woman are engaged, they love each other, and then he gets word that he might, be deployed for military action, sent to a hot combat zone, very good chance he would be killed in action. In view of that present distress, it might spare this young woman the pain of being a widow, of marrying a man and then being a widow. So you might say, hey, I think under the conditions, it may be best to put this wedding off until you get back home. But if you want to get married, it's not a sin. That's the spirit in which I think Paul is talking here. What happens is that a lot of people absolutize this text as though it's the only thing in the whole Bible that addresses singleness. So if you remember what we talked about yesterday, if we want to know what the Bible says about all things related to sexuality, look at the picture on the box, and then that can help us understand what the other texts are getting at. So the picture on the box is this is the way God made the world. And the grace of God in Christ does not overturn that creation order, but rather it expands it and empowers it by the power of the Spirit. But the basic expectation of marriage and family life is not overturned. So let me give you another example. 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5, I'm looking at verse 9. Let me start in verse 11. He's talking about a social service program that the church had put together that Timothy was working on here in Ephesus. And so Paul is saying, hey, you got different people that need assistance. You have older widows, you have younger widows. How do we care for these women? So verse 11, he says, refuse to enroll younger widows. For when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So, here's a counsel. I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. Point being here is that in this circumstance, we have a different set of conditions. And under these conditions, you have these young women that are widows. And Paul is saying, these women they don't have husbands, they don't have children to take care of, and so they're just kind of going around and meddling in other people's business, and that is bringing disrepute on the name of Christ. And so in these cases, these women, my instruction is I would have them get married, have children, take care of their houses, so that way there's no opportunity for occasion for slander. And so in those circumstances, he's explicitly telling them they need to get married because marriage will solve a lot of the problems that he's seeing. Whereas in 1 Corinthians 7, he's saying, hey, if this present distress might mean you shouldn't get married, but you're free to do so. It's not a sin if you do. So what we want to do is say, okay, in both situations, the creation order is still in effect. And in one situation, Paul would say, hey, marriage may not be the right thing right now, but if you want to get married, it's fine. And in a different situation, he's saying, you all need to get married because you're causing trouble because you got too much idle time on your hands. And in both cases, the creation order is still in effect, but it's applied differently in those circumstances. And so everybody knows about 1 Corinthians 7, but hardly anybody knows about 1 Timothy 5. And it's just because in our modern age, we want to find ways to champion singleness. And and let's face it, like if you have a lot of single women, they're lonely and unmarried, they're going to buy magazines and subscribe to publications that will tell them this is good. It's better than marriage. God made you to be single. Singleness is better than being married. That affirms them, and women want to be affirmed in whatever they're in. Nobody wants to challenge women because we don't think women can sin. But newsflash, women can sin. And pastors need to care for women and men by saying men sin in one way, women sin in other ways. We need to be able to address them all. And I think this is a feminine-driven impulse to try to overturn the creation order. And I think that is, underneath all that is a feminist desire to say marriage, having babies and stuff is really, it's just an optional accessory for an otherwise faithful Christian life. And that just is not what you see cover to cover in your Bible. Hopefully that helps and didn't make it worse.
That's super helpful. We'll take care of all of the issues that you cause. It's all good. We're here for it. So staying with singleness a little bit, kind of two-part question specifically for women. What does it look like for a single woman to live according to their purpose if, as you're arguing, it's tied to being a wife or a mother? And then two-part, how do they actively pursue education and career in a godly way while waiting and desiring for marriage?
Can you read the first one again,
So the
please?
first one is how do they live according to their purpose is if they're single, not married, and you're saying that a large part of their purpose is tied to mothering and wife.
So there's a vocation question. I might need to ask you to remind me again the other one. I fleshed this out more in the book, but God designed us for vocations, and the vocation can transcend just the biological application of it. So what is the telos? Telos meaning what is the goal? What is the ultimate purpose of masculinity, femininity, male and female? It is reproduction. It is building a household, which means fatherhood and motherhood. There's biological fatherhood, biological motherhood, which is obvious in how that comes about. But then there's the vocations of fatherhood and motherhood, which transcend the biological reality. So Paul talks about, I became a father to you in the faith. And I believe it's in 1 Corinthians. So Paul is a father spiritually. And in 1 Corinthians 3, I believe it is, he said, you have countless guides, but not many fathers. He's like, you all need fathers, spiritual fathers. He's speaking of fatherhood as a vocation, not as the biological act of siring children, but of imparting life. I'm going to father you, meaning I want to provide for you, and I want to beget myself in you and be a father to you. So a man can pursue the vocation of fatherhood by begetting himself in another. A lot of you know, is it 2 Timothy 2:2, the things you've heard in the presence of many witnesses, impart to faithful men. It's a spiritual fatherhood. You're begetting your life in someone else. In the same way with a woman, there's the vocation of motherhood that every single woman should be training her heart to aspire to and pursue in preparation for the biological reality of motherhood that will come. So what is the vocation of motherhood entail? Well, at its essence, it's life, giving life. And women are life givers. That's the core strength of women. Her glory is to be a life giver. She's the mother of all living. And you can be a mother to other women, or to other people rather, even if you don't have biological children. And so it's a similar message that I would say to couples that are infertile. If they don't have biological children, maybe they can adopt or foster or something like that. But even still, it's like God hardwired us to pursue the telos of our sexuality, which is fatherhood and motherhood. And so I tell that man, you need to be begetting life in other people. Like who can you be a father to, and what would that look like? And same thing for a woman. So a lot of times with women, it's like, what are the things you might do for children that you can do for other people? You feed them, you nourish, you take care of them. And women are just natural good caregivers. And so I would say for young women that, or for a woman that doesn't have a child, the biological instincts that God gave you as a woman to be a life giver, to be a caregiver, nurturer, life giver, you can pursue those even if you don't have biological children. And as parents, you want to train up your kids to pursue those. So for my daughter, I always try to encourage the little natural signs that I see in her to give life. If she's nurturing, she's taking care of something, she's showing compassion, she's healing somebody that's hurting. I always want to encourage those things. I'm like, you're a healer, you're a life giver. That's the way God made you. That's a natural good thing for a woman to do. Now, related to the second question about how do you do that? Because prior generations, the universal expectation was that the vast majority of people would get married and have children. Now that's no longer the expectation because our culture no longer supports it. And in too many cases, the church follows the lead of culture. So the church is taking its cues from the world, and now we're promoting singleness as the ideal. Because marriage and motherhood, that could be an idol. We don't want to be an idolater, so be single, as though singleness couldn't be an idol. So we promote these worldly ideologies even in the church. So that's why it's a lot more difficult. And so I will fully acknowledge it is hard, much harder than it was even when I found my wife, to find a godly spouse, because there are just so many obstacles and speed bumps to get over. So acknowledging the difficulty, it is a place to exercise great faith. I want to trust God to give me a spouse. So I'm speaking to women now. You're going to trust God to give you a husband, and then pursue, and this is a thread the needle here, pursue future job opportunities and education opportunities that will translate most naturally into marriage and motherhood, assuming God answers that prayer. So you don't want to lock yourself into a career path that will limit your marriage and childbearing options in the future. Rather, you want to pursue education and job opportunities that will easily transfer over into marriage and family life. So in the case of my wife, she got a nursing degree. There's always a need for nurses. And so we got married and we started having children. She was not a nurse anymore, but she still had that skill. And before we had children, she was able to work as a nurse, and we were able to pay off debts, and that was very helpful for us. And now that my kids are older, we for a couple of years it was a live conversation. What do I do now with my nursing degree? She thought I could be a school nurse at my kid's school, but that was like, well, that's a full-time job, and we don't want that. We want part-time work. And there's a pregnancy resource center down the street from us. It's right across the street from Planned Parenthood, and my wife is fiercely pro-life. And she's like, well, I can do ultrasounds for pregnant women, and it's right down the street from us. The hours, it's 2 days a week, and the hours slot in when my kids, she would show up after my kids leave for school and get home before my kids get home. And so that doesn't interfere with home life, 2 days a week, and she has just a fire-hot passion for helping women to make life-affirming choices. So it worked for her, but it was something that was easily transferable and applicable at home. So whenever my kids are sick, I've got a medical professional in my home. And she's like, I don't need to go see the doctor, he'll be fine. I've seen this 100 times because she's skilled in that way. It's a thing where it's like you have to be fiercely practical, and Christians are pietistic, and we have an aversion to really thinking in terms of just practical things, and that's a skill we have to develop. You just have to think, okay, these educational options are too intrusive on family life and they demand too much. I want to scratch those off the list. These other ones, I can get if let's say it takes me 5-10 years before I find a husband. That could happen. Who knows? So I don't want to be working, minimum wage fast food or something. It's like I want to give myself an education and be able to make a decent living. So what are the options that is good for a woman to do and that don't limit your future applicability of those things in a home, and focus on those. Is that good enough? Okay.
I think so, absolutely.
These
That's
are hard
really-
questions, so I tend to talk more on
No,
those.
super helpful. Kind of zooming forward to dating, how do you recommend men and women apply gender roles into that, if at all? I do college ministry, so this is like par for the course questions. Like, how much do men lead in dating, or do they not? Do they open up the Bible and do family worship while they're dating or not? How do you kind of speak into that? How do you empower women in what that will look like, and men in what that will look like if they're in a dating relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's you want to look at a direction that you're headed, but you're not there yet. And so the way that we do even dating now is a bit unnatural to the world of the Bible. So in the Bible times, we didn't have this prolonged dating courtship period of time. You would typically just be getting married fairly young. So now we have this season of life where we're trying to test driving each other, feeling each other out, and saying, like, are we compatible or not? And there's a lot of things you have to work out. And part of that is like, do they want to move with the grain of God's design? Do they want to operate in the way the world is made? And that's what you're trying to figure out. So, guys, I would say you want to demonstrate a decisiveness and a willingness to lead, but she's not your wife. She doesn't have to submit to you. She is most covenantally under her father's roof. She belongs to her dad. That's why in weddings we ceremonially give away the bride, because the father is saying, she's yours now. She was my responsibility. Now she is your responsibility. I want to give my daughter to you. Now she will submit to you, and you're going to be her covering. But before that, you're not her dad. So you can do small things to show decisiveness and leadership, knowing that she doesn't have an obligation to follow your lead. And women can be choosy. Men pursue and women choose. Women's like, I want to choose this one. He is worthy of me. And that is a major way women can exercise agency, is like you're going to say yes to some and say no to others. Men ask, and then girls say, yes, I will go out with you. No, I won't go out with you, because she's like, I don't think you're worthy, or I think you're worthy. And so she needs to have maximal ability to be able to evaluate you. And so be decisive, lead. I'm like, hey, let's go out to dinner. I have a plan. I want us to go here. Make plans. Here's what I want us to do for tonight. I'd like to take you out here, and then we'll walk in this park, and then we'll go see this movie, and then I'll drop you off by 10, whatever. That's a good way to show some leadership, because you're being decisive. For young ladies, I would say, like, you can support that, encourage that, look for that. If he's always looking to you, then that could just mean he's never done it before. He doesn't know how to lead a woman. And guys are going to just be really clumsy and bad at this. And he's going to think naturally that, I like this girl, she's cute, I want to go out with her. Maybe she's a godly woman. And so I don't want to screw this up. And so I want to do everything I can to accommodate her and impress her. And what he's projecting is weakness, and that it's not decisiveness. He's not leading. And he thinks the way that he leads is do everything that she wants. And that's not a good foundation for a relationship. And so, ladies, if you pick up on that, a way that you can kind of send signals of submissiveness and is to say, I'd love for you to make that decision. Like I want to go where you want to take me to dinner, and I'll be happy with whatever you choose. Or maybe girls do like veto power, so everywhere but that Mexican place. I had a hair in my food once there, and it's weird. Other than that,
guys, don't take her to Taco Casa, okay?
But you can start practicing these things early, knowing that they don't become fully operative until you seal the deal and you are legally wed. But until then, you can give indicators of that. But there is a lot of it's more impulses and nudges, and what direction are you going that you can signal early. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. What is gravitas? Use that in your book, and how do men grow in that?
Men?
Yeah.
Gravitas is weight, so it's an intuitive thing. So if you think of trampoline, if you put a marble on a trampoline, it doesn't have any weight. And so you can put a bunch of marbles on there and they'll just kind of roll around. But if you put a bowling ball on a trampoline and then put marbles on it, all the marbles will roll towards the bowling ball because it has more weight. Gravity works similar. It's a concept that it's applicable in the Christian world, but is popular in the Roman world back in the time of the early church. But it's the idea of a man that has weight. So a man that has weight is a man that he has a strength, he has a presence, and you can feel it. There's some men that you talk to, and they just stand out. And you're like, this is a serious man. And for me, it's like many of you guys, I've shake your hand, young guys. I talk to them like, that man's got weight. That man, he is a serious man. He's got substance. And that doesn't mean he can't tell a joke. There's no levity about him, but it's like he's not a lightweight. So a way that a man can develop gravitas is to be a serious man, to be a competent man, and to develop your masculine strength, but to have it under control. And there's 100 things we could say, but that is really the basic sketch of gravitas. And it's a sort of man that when you meet him, you can take him seriously. And that's a man that can be counted on. And I think that's why men with gravitas stand out. If a man doesn't have gravitas, then there's going to be a reluctance to count on him. And women can feel that, especially if it's like in a dating relationship. Women can, a man that doesn't have weight, he's not a serious man, that could be a turnoff to a serious woman who's looking for a man that can lead her. Because I want a guy that's competent, who's not going to drive my family off a cliff. Can I trust this man? Maybe a way to tell if you have gravitas or not is there anybody that's counting on you? And if there's people that are counting on you and they trust you with what they're counting on you, then you've got weight. You've got gravitas because people are depending on you. And the best way to build gravitas is to become a man that is more dependable. You can carry more weight. And that means you can have more people relying on you in more pivotal areas. And that's why we look for in leaders. There's let's say Rick Warren, for example, as a pastor. I see him come out with his Hawaiian shirt, and he's just this jovial, goofy guy. And I'm like, he can have a huge church, but I'm like, he's a lightweight. That he's not a serious man, and I don't take him seriously. And when I listen to him talk, and I'm like, he's not intellectually rigorous or serious. You want to be around men that have that sort of weight are men that can lead. And it doesn't always, Rick Warren has a huge church, so it's not like that's going to determine the size of a church. It's going to determine the character of the church. And if you look at Saddleback Church, it's not a serious church. But I come here, I'm like, this is a serious church. And I meet the people here, and I'm like, these are serious people. These are people that are, the things that you guys have said to me, are like, hey, thanks for shooting us straight. Thanks for saying the hard thing that is uncomfortable. We appreciate that. I'm like, these are serious people. There's weight here. There's gravitas here. And you all can build each other up and become more people of weight, even just amongst your own culture. I'll stop talking there.
Before we move on to marriage and family, so you talked about how so many of us are recovering feminists. So many people don't. We haven't been discipled in families. We might not have families that are setting good examples. So what do young single men and women look for? Kind of non-negotiables that you can build upon from there, because we don't have the whole package, most of us that are younger. And so what do they look for? Like, you got to have this. The rest we can work with.
There are certain tells you can look to. You want to look at the raw material and look at the direction that they're headed. So if let's say you meet a girl, like she's cute, you like her, good personality, and she's like, yeah, I want to, get married and have a couple kids, but have a career. Dig into that, because maybe she hasn't thought about it, and that's totally fine. She hasn't really thought about it. She's just kind of absorbing cultural messages, or maybe that's a settled commitment. That's a conviction. I'm going to have 2 children, because any more than that would get in the way of my career, and my career is what I'm really after. That's a big indicator of where she's headed. Now, she may change later, but as far as you know, that gives you some insight. So you want to look at like where they are now, but try to see as best you can what direction are they headed, what are they pursuing, do they have a good foundation to build on, and then you can determine how much of a risk would you take in the areas that seem like they're not quite where you'd want them to be. And you probably have areas that are not quite where you want them to be also. But the thing is, it's when you can, well, here's another thing that just come to mind. Look at the biggest influences in their life. Like, who is shaping them? Whenever people in my church say, yeah, I've met this guy I've been going out with, I'll ask her, like, where's he go to church? First question every time. Because I know all the churches in town, I know the pastors in town, a lot of them anyway. I'm like, oh, he goes to that church? Okay, that's the environment that is forming him intellectually, spiritually, theologically. That could be a great environment. I'm like, that's a great church. That pastor's a great dude. And that immediately tells me, okay, if he's there, then I know what his influences are. But the opposite could also be true. My son, he was interested in this girl that went to a local megachurch in town, and this, just to be blunt, this church is a joke. You might have seen, like, online, it's like for a Super Bowl thing, they kicked a Bible. Like, they did like a field goal thing, and it's like, hey, let's kick a Bible. And they like kicked the Bible into the audience and stuff, and that was their Super Bowl Sunday. I mean, they're just, the church is a joke. Well, he's dating a girl that goes to this church, and he met her at school, and I was like, he's like, no, but she's not a feminist, Dad. You know, she's great. And I was like, well, but she was all gung-ho about her church. Oh man, our church is amazing. It's so funny, it's entertaining, and I'm like, son, that's red flags. Because she is in an environment, and she's been there since she was a child, that is shaping her in these ways that are really ungodly, that are blasphemous, perhaps? I mean, like really obscene things. So that's a tell. But really, there's a number of things. I was talking to some young ladies last night, and the best thing I could give you practically is get your pastors involved. If you have pastors you trust that know you, any godly man, godly pastor, would be eager to meet the person that you're interested in, or talk to you about that person and help size them up, because there's going to be a lot of things that they may present that look good or look bad. But under the hood, it could be a different story. And you might need somebody that is invested in your life and cares about you to kind of help kind of discern the whole picture. But you can't predict the future. There's always a degree of risk that comes with dating relationships, potential marriage. But those are a few things that you can do to get an idea of where they're coming from.
Moving more in the family direction, you talked about how post-industrial revolution, it's created unique challenges. So how can families overcome those new situations with technology and fathers largely physically absent from the home due to their jobs?
Some jobs give you the more recently, remote work is more of a possibility. So that does give fathers opportunity to work from home and just be around more. That could be one way. If you don't have that option, being productive together as a family can be really helpful to bind you together in the work that you do as a household. If there's the thing, it's like we are so removed from the ancient context that we're having to push against the modern incentives that pull us apart. And so it's like, if you have a job, men, that requires a lot of travel, or you're gone a lot, I mean, that's going to be a heavy burden on your family. It could be just like find other ways to be more present at home. But I guess a lot of it depends on just the demands of the work. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer without more specific details to respond to.
What is a productive household, like you just talked about, and what are practical ways to start building one?
productive household is just like you're doing things together as a household. So there's a sense of, so work, one aspect of household life that we didn't get into is just their kinship, authority, work, legacy. These are 4 aspects of a godly household. And work is one of the biggest ones where you can control a lot of it. So there's a sense of building a legacy means thinking about work and provision over generations. The way a lot of us think about it is like, well, I got my job, and kids are out of the house, they're going to get a degree, and they're going to go do their job. And so we have isolated work, isolated careers from one another. But houses that can be more productive, they're thinking more in terms of how can we work together. Family businesses, I think, is a great simple way, but that not everybody can do that. But the more that you can do to work together, so like the most basic level is doing chores. Every kid should have chores because they need to think about, like, you need to make a contribution. You're not a consumer. You need to help serve one another. You need to help other people. And that's where it begins when the kids are little. But as it grows, like my kids are now reaching the age where I'm thinking, I want to set them up in a future career. We bought this one house that we've been renting out. I want to buy another one, and I want to help my sons develop a real estate portfolio and for them to be able to work that. I don't know if that's the way to work out, but I'm trying to think that way. I'm trying to think like what sort of work will best build the next generation of my household, and how can I help them? But it's a commitment that at the heart of it is we are all contributing to the household health and flourishing together, and we're not just consumers. Yeah.
Someone asked, am I being faithful to the dominion mandate to multiply if I only have one kid? Let's just say extenuating circumstances accepted.
Yeah, you can be. There's no, I think, like, what is your heart? If you're like, I want 1, 2 kids, anything more than that is going to cramp my style, then I would say that's a heart problem. You're viewing children as a burden, not as a blessing. If it is my great-grandfather, I told you about him, they only had 1 kid. My grandmother, Mama Ethel, she's 90, she's in her mid-90s now, she's still kicking. But they only had 1 child, just biologically, they were never able to conceive. But then she had 4 children, and then those kids had multiple grandchildren. So his legacy was a slow starter, because it wasn't until they started having grandchildren that expanded. But he was this wealthy man, the guy on the porch spitting chewing tobacco, that was him. But he only had 1 child. So I would say, like, we just can't be legalistic about these things. We have a heart posture toward obedience, but in this world, people can get really wonky. We have some people that just, all contraception is evil, it's always bad. That's not my view. I think children are a blessing, and I want to live toward the blessing that children are. And that doesn't mean that every sex act has to produce, at least have the potential to produce a child. I don't think we can require that. But I do think we want to view children as a blessing that they are. And we want to have as many as is reasonable for somebody to have without requiring, well, if she can reproduce a dozen, 15, 20 kids, then, just in the modern world, that doesn't always work. And that's just you can get to a point to where it's just practically unfeasible, and we can be realistic about that. We don't have to be legalistic about it, but we want to avoid where our world is, which is kids are an optional accessory for our designer life and our designer marriage. We don't want to have that attitude. We want to have children are a blessing, and I want to raise up as many kids as is reasonable to have, and not put a number on it.
Kind of along those lines, if a wife desires more children, but her husband doesn't because they don't have the money or space, what should they do?
I would say, do they really not have the money or space?
Unpack that.
Okay.
A lot of people wanted this question, so you're in a safe place.
Thank you. I want to be in a safe space. My first house I bought in Louisville, Kentucky, and that house was built in the 50s in a neighborhood of all the houses that were pretty much the same. It was a Cape Cod house, 2 bedrooms. And in those days, there were large families. It's Catholic, Louisville's a Catholic town. And large families lived in these houses, a lot of them. And large Catholic families could have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dozen kids. And they lived in these little houses. One bathroom, 2 bedrooms. How do they do it? Now we say, oh, we can't do that. The house is not big enough. And I'm like, how many square feet per child do you need? We have to kind of deprogram our expectations of what are needs and what are luxuries. If God would provide for you in such a way that you can have a very large house and everybody have their own bedroom, more power to you, do it. But if you don't have the sort of income where you can have that house and you're like, okay, we got a 3-bedroom house, mom and dad, girls here, boys there. You can do that. Look at immigrant families. A lot of times they come over, they're poor, they're desperate, and they're like, we live in a house and there's like 15 adults living in a small house. They figured out they make it work, and you can do that. Now, there's extremes that would be absurd, but there are attainable difficulties that we can grow into, and that's what I'm aiming at. Your house and your budget will probably stretch more than you think, and your expectations are probably more luxurious than you realize, because previous generations didn't require what we require nowadays. Now think about car seat laws. Do you know what determines the number of kids people have? It's how many car seats will fit in a vehicle. That's why people tend to cap out at 4, because that's how many seats typically you'll get in a minivan. And it's like we've imposed these restrictions on ourselves needlessly through these arbitrary laws. And so think of the same idea with your house. What do you need to survive, and what luxuries can you do without? So my associate pastor, Wade Thomas, who leads worship at our church, he has 6 children. They're adopting a 7th, and whenever they get this child, they may have more. But he lives in a Cape Cod house, 2 bedrooms, and he and his wife live in the upstairs, 1 bathroom. And they make it work. And he lives this way, and he's just like, we don't have internet in our house, we can't afford that, but he's got a cell phone that is paid for by his church, the church plan. And so the internet at his house is his phone that he uses on the 5G connection. And that's the way they make it work. If they need to get online, they'll use this phone as a hotspot. This is one example. It's like, who says that you have to have broadband internet in every home to survive? I'm like, yeah, it's a pain if you don't have it. Your Netflix might get blurry, but then again, who says you have to have Netflix if it buffers, or whatever? It's like, that's what I say. It's like you might have to adjust your lifestyle expectations, and those lifestyle. If you have, just what does it say about your priorities? It's like we can't have a 4th child when we've got 3, because then we'll have to give up broadband internet. It says you value internet more than that other kid, right? So let that kind of prick your heart. As a general rule, I think people probably can have more kids than they think. That doesn't mean you need to have a dozen, but you could probably have more than you think. So if you got 3, could we live with 4? Think about it.
Thank you. What financial advice do you have for 20 to 30-year-olds who are thinking generationally about family? Other than get a job. Get a job.
Yeah, with financial advice, I'm a little hesitant to say. I can tell you what I've done. I want to leave wealth to my kids. That's biblical. I don't have the reference at the ready, but the scriptures speak about the blessing of leaving wealth to your children and your grandchildren. So that's a good thing. I believe it's Proverbs. I want to leave. We're not wealthy. I mean, I'm a pastor. I make a pastor's salary. But we've put out money in retirement. We try to buy cryptocurrency that's not all my investment, but I do have some crypto because I think that will be a good way to protect. But it's like there's a lot of just economic factors that I'm not qualified to speak to. But I think it is a good thing to be able to help your kids. My parents, my dad does this, especially. Dad's a wonderful, godly man. I hope I made that clear. My dad's a wonderful man, and he's. Whenever we bought that rental house that we got, that was an investment in the future. It wasn't just a way to make money month to month, but it was an investment in real estate. And whenever we did that, my dad gave us money to help pay for that, because he's lived his life in such a way that he wants to be a financial blessing to his children. You've got like these kind of rich kid syndrome where they're irresponsible. I mean, like that's. I'm not saying that to where it's like you just kind of give your kids everything. They need to work for what they have. But there will come a time when your kids will reach a point in their life to when you can help them. I want to help you pay a down payment on your first house. I want to help, I want to bless you with sizable gifts from time to time. And my dad's not a rich man. He's an electrician, blue collar guy, electrical worker. But he's managed his money in such a way that he can bless his kids financially. I think that's a good policy generally as far as what your financial priority should be. You should talk to a financial advisor.
Blake White at ssbaptist.org. How do you raise kids if you aren't able to homeschool or private school and you have to send them to public schools? How do you do that in the best way possible?
I would ask, do you have to send them to public school? Really, let's say a single mom, and that is the only option. Let's say if it's that kind of situation, there has to be an ongoing dialogue all the time with the children about what they're experiencing, what they're seeing, and they have to be prepared mentally. But you have to be very intentional. It's such an uphill climb that I would say it's if you can avoid it at all, if at all. Avoid it. And if it's just like there is just no other way, then I would want to say, let's talk through your particular circumstances and how can we make this best. If you have a dad at home, so if you're talking about a situation where there's a dad at home, I'm like, Dad, like your role is always important, but it is of all the more importance in that kind of situation if you don't have an option. But I can't give a whole lot of specifics without knowing the circumstances of the case.
Question, personally, why do you prefer the term patriarch versus complementarian? Because you got all the bad press out there about patriarchy, especially if you're a college student. You say, yeah, I'm seeking as a woman or man to pursue patriarchy. You get some wide eyes. So why'd you choose that term?
The word complementarian, it's a new word, it's a novel word. It's hard to define, and it means different things to different people. So like somebody tells me they're complementarian, that doesn't tell me a whole lot about them. If somebody says I'm a patriarch, that tells me a lot about them. And it tells me you're willing to use a controversial word to describe a biblical view. And so it can be kind of a shibboleth, like here's a signal, a dog whistle. I'm going to use this word patriarch, and in a conversation, there's a lot of things you can assume about somebody, but it's not a hill I die on. In certain circles, if I know that the word patriarchy just would really be misunderstood, and it would introduce all kinds of hurdles to get the point across, then I'm happy to use the word complementarian, but then I just have to define it. So the point being, there's really not a great word. Patriarchy's got baggage. Complementarianism can be squishy and unclear. And there isn't a third word or a different word that isn't a paragraph. So I think for the sake of, I prefer controversy that's clear over lack of controversy that's ambiguous. And that's why I go that route.
Final question. How are you your own stepbrother?
I wondered if this would come up. All right, I told you this story yesterday. Whenever my mom and dad divorced, she had an affair with this other man. Whenever my parents were splitting up and they were just trying to put their lives together, they also had to be talking with Dean, the guy that was my stepfather, and his wife, because he was married, and they're like, we're not just 2 divorces, we're 2 divorces and a baby. What do we do about this baby? And so they had to talk about what to do about this baby. And so by the time they got to these conversations, it was clear that my mom was going to stay with Dean. And so now they're dealing with this baby. But in these meetings, my dad had kind of struck up a friendship with Janice, who was Dean's wife. And you see where this is going. And so after the divorces were final, Dad was just kind of like, we're both hurting, we're both wounded, we've been cheated on, we're trying to pick up the pieces of our life, but we have a common problem. So there's a lot we have in common. Let's get together and talk and just comfort each other. And they did, and they ended up falling in love and getting married. So Mom and Dad were married, Dean and Janice were married. They both divorced. Dad married Janice, Mom married Dean. And so I am my own stepbrother. Another part of that story I didn't mention yesterday. Whenever my sister told me what Dean had done, my mom left him, and they ended that marriage. And now my mom is married to a man named Jim, and he's a great guy. Jim's a great man. So the man she's married to now is a wonderful man, and they are both growing in Christ. And so there's been a beautiful redemption in her life too. So I speak of my stepdad because Jim is my stepdad now technically, but to me it's just Jim because I didn't grow up with him. And so I say stepdad, but I'm thinking of Dean. But that's how I'm my own stepbrother.
Well, that is a sad and really cool 2 truths and a lie fact right there. I mean, that might be the best one I've ever heard.
Two what?
2 truths and a lie, you heard that?
Oh.
Yeah. No one's going to think that's the truth. I am my own stepbrother. But
Yeah.
if you've never used that, you should go to a party soon and, 2 truths and a lie, on your men's night.
Yeah,
But,
there's other stories that would really break your brain that's even more interesting, but look at the time.
Well, I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone for your courage and clarity. It's not easy to do what you did today. We give it up.